take a question?
Do you want to just tell her to cover?
Late, please in the future be on time. I'm very serious in this course about timeliness, so let that be a lesson to all of you. Okay, great. So let's get started now. Welcome, you guys, to Art History 104, Intro to Primatev Apestraction. I'm Dr. Rose Berchetti. My contact info and office hours appear here. Before we get started, we want to thank our corporate sponsors today for making our class possible. In particular, we want to thank our parent company, Halliburton, solving challenges. So first of all, who can tell me what this is? Anyone?
Photograph of a dollar bill.
Very good. This is what the dollar bill looked like up until, about 30 years ago. So, as you guys are familiar with our current currency, it's important that we start with our former dollar bill, because really the transition in our literal and metaphorical understanding of money can be traced back to the art market and the development of our contemporary movement, Primatev Apestraction. So really this all begins in the middle of the 20th century with the work of critic Clement Greenberg. He was active in the 1940s through the 1960s, and he was known for being a singularly focused proponent of non-objective or abstract art. He believed that art should call attention to its making, its materiality, the process. He also believed in sort of a monoculture, a singular progression of art making that moved forward, didn't branch off, it didn't loop back, there was only forward progress. So you can see here on the left, we start with Manet, sort of brushiness, calling attention to the process of making art, go to Cézanne, Cubism, and move into full-on abstraction or non-objective art, as we call it. He was a man before his time, and a few decades after his most important work was done, artists in the market really kind of turned away and rejected his ideas. We had this kind of stuff, which we just glaze over, that's stupid. And that moves us now into zombie formalism, which really came up in the 2010s. The conditions were really ripe at that point for reviving the previously dead formalist aesthetic of Greenberg. These pieces are all, based on process, on formalism. The piece on the left is Lucian Smith. It's made with a fire extinguisher. In the center, we have Oscar Murillo. It's made by rubbing the canvas on the dirty ground. We have Dan Colin on the right, which is in fact painted, but it's made to look like bird shit. So really the process and the materiality are very important. These artists were able to make a lot of work, which allowed dealers to kind of hold on and sell them as they needed, so that they could really use the market to set prices. The work was easily flipped, resold, prices bidded up. And it really fetishized youth, celebrity, good-looking artists, people with an interesting backstory. And unfortunately, in the early years, there was really a backlash from critics. But as we progressed, media consolidation allowed those voices of dissent to be silenced, so that the market and critical ideas became fully integrated into a single way of talking about art. And art was able to really exist as a commodity, purely capitalistic. Unfortunately, market regulation and the cost of living in the Western world meant that artists were taking an astronomical percent of artwork sold. Back then, artists were earning about 50% of the cost of art, which really, that's just huge. It's an unsustainable practice. So, at this time, along came this man, Fernando Aguirre, and he was about to change the face of the art market. He was a famous CEO of Chiquita. He, at one point, was on television impersonating an immigrant on the show Undercover Boss, which was popular at the time. And Chiquita's been long loved and respected part of American culture. Its name is synonymous with our most beloved and popular fruit. They're an organization so respected for providing cheap bananas to one of the richest countries in the world, and they never have stopped fighting the good fight to provide their customers and shareholders with the most value. And this has sometimes meant making hard decisions, having to organize massacres, war crimes, using toxic pesticides like hydrogen cyanide, which you guys probably know as Zyklon B. So he's obviously a great man, but he retired in 2012 and was looking for his next venture. He'd seen firsthand in his social circles how collectors were suffering, having to pay artists so much. And he saw the need to increase the profit margin and thought about how it could be made cheaply. Now, in the early 2000s, the Chinese really ramped up production of cheap commodities, including oil paintings. They were able to take art graduates and work them to the bone, painting copies of masterpieces to sell at reasonable prices. This was mostly catering to middle-class Americans who wanted something familiar, something customizable. But as the middle class withered, the art factories needed to change direction. And around this time, research into how bananas could purify water was going on. Banana companies were very interested in finding a new use for their commodity, and Mr. Aguirre saw an opportunity to leverage his connections in the banana market. And remember, this is the kind of the imagery that is popular around this time. And so really just in, Mr. Aguirre's mind, he put together sweatshops and pollution and zombie formalism and bananas. And he helped create Chinese extortionism, which came about in about 2030, also called sweatshop art, global supply chain process art. Both of these pieces are anonymous. And these were made in Chinese sweatshops using the industrial sludge purified off the water using banana peels as the purification method. So this really allowed for, banana market to go up, for water and art to both be created with no waste, multiple very high value commodities. You can see this here, the piece on the right has a little secret message in Chinese. It says, "Help me." These are the kind of delicate and appealing details that still make some of these pieces collectible today. But however, this movement really didn't last, and for two important reasons. One was the use of highly toxic materials being shipped internationally really just led to litigation and investigation, and that threatened the art market with regulation, and we all know an unregulated market is a good market. But the bigger problem was collectors just didn't feel a connection to the artists. They just didn't care. They couldn't relate to these people. They needed a figure that they could connect to, someone with charisma, appeal. And at this point, Mr. Aguirre still wanted to be a player in the art world. He saw his previous venture not going well, and he also wanted to continue to leverage his investment in bananas. And he realized that there were artists out there who were also incredibly talented, could make work incredibly cheap, they were incredibly appealing, and they were willing to work, not for cash, simply for bananas. And that brings us to Primatev Apestraction, coming in about 10 years ago, also called Chimpressionism sometimes. Collectors were really drawn to the raw, animalistic, way of painting. Dealers loved it because the artists could be sort of housed together, taken care of cheaply, just working for bananas. So now, before our class time ends today, we'll touch on just a few precursors to this movement who were kind of foreshadowing that this was about to happen. The first is Congo. He was a painter working under the zoologist Desmond Morris from 1954 to 1964. He was known for really liking balance. He would make marks on one side of the paper and then balance it on the other side. You can see he's got a nice way of kind of composing, finding a layered central area by focus in his works. Picasso actually owned one of his pieces. And sadly, he died of tuberculosis at age 10 in 1964. You can really see his influences, Hans Hofmann, his student Joan Mitchell, in terms of paint application and composition. And really, it's interesting how these things kind of circle back, because in 2005, Hoffman and Congo were sold back-to-back lots at a Bonham's auction. And as you can see, Hoffman's piece only sold for 60% of Congo's. So there's, some foreshadowing of the future. So the next artist we'll touch on is Pierre Bresson. He was born in 1960, and in 1964, a Swedish journalist, Aki Axelsson, set up an exhibit of paintings by him under the pseudonym Pierre Bresson as a joke. And critics praised the work. One wrote, "Bresson paints with powerful strokes, but also with clear determination. His brushstrokes twist with furious fastidiousness. Pierre is an artist who performs with the delicacy of a ballet dancer." Even after the hoax was revealed, critics kind of agreed the work was still the strongest in the show. Unfortunately, he was transferred to a zoo in the UK and kind of lost track of. You can see here some more examples of his work, those strong balletic brushstrokes. Then we have Pockets Warhol, who came up, born in 1992. And he was a pet monkey in British Columbia. He had to be rehomed due to some issues and moved to a shelter in Toronto, where his keepers taught him how to paint. He was actually named because of his likeness to the famous Andy Warhol, the similar crazy white hair, the thousand-yard stare. You can really see his influences in de Kooning, early Guston, just in terms of color, in terms of clarity. We've got sort of these larger farms of monkeys working together, making art together, really similar to kind of an art school back in the old days. So yeah, that was our brief overview of the development of this field. Next week we'll be talking about Coco the gorilla, because her unique use of language and her painting abilities really place her at the intersection of abstract impressionism and primative Apestraction. So check your syllabus for the reading, and I will see you all on Wednesday. Thank you.